I'm Daejah Woolery. Talk mostly on TikTok, but also YouTube and Instagram about film, television, and within that, diversity and representation, inclusion, writing, just anything I can get my hands on, but particularly with an eye towards marginalized voices. And I'm also studying film, television, and English in New York. So that's the spark notes of me.
Cool. Do you want to talk a little bit about your TikTok and sort of like how you started that and what your goal is with it?
So I actually downloaded TikTok for a job. Um, Pre-pandemic, I was working for something. I was doing social media marketing, and they were like, "Oh, we're kind of getting into TikTok. Let's like learn about it more." So that's why I downloaded it. And then I found myself making videos about television and just the things that I wanted to talk about, the aspects of it that interested me. And slowly, I found people were interested in it. And I also realized the more I tried to tailor my content, the harder it got. But if I just ran with a passion for TV and saw who wanted to come along with the ride, it worked a lot better. And so it's just been a lot of trying to find and also attract people with an interest in that and with growing interest in that. So it's been really fun.
What like I guess what pushed you to make the initial video like for yourself? Because you said that you started like for
Mhm.
the job and like eventually made your own content, but like what was it in your mind that like gave you the idea of like I want to like talk about this and I think that like it's important for people to hear?
Yeah. I mean, like a lot of people, it was like, early pandemic, just in the house, stir crazy, like, I'm going to do a video. But it's also interesting that, like, I could talk about TV forever. And I was living with my parents and my family at that time, and they are not people who want to have conversations about TV much. So just looking for like a space and an opportunity to talk about it, it just seemed like the right place to turn. And the more I've, been on there and just gotten that opportunity to talk about it and have those conversations, I've realized how important they are in like expanding things. And you had asked earlier about like goals for the account going forward and just creating spaces where people can have conversations about media they're already watching. And I think there can be a lot of pretension that's thought of with film and TV because it's like when people want to talk about a movie and learn a concept, why should they have to have watched this classic film? Why should they have to have watched every episode of The Sopranos? Anything you could learn from those, you could learn from whatever you're watching, whatever your favorite show is. It's already there and available for people to get access to.
Yeah.
So just creating spaces where it's like, oh, you want to learn about television theory? Cool. What do you like? Are we learning about television theory through Riverdale? All right, wouldn't be my pick, but we're doing it. Like,
Yeah.
we can figure that out and create those places for people. Yeah.
For sure.
No, I like that. I think that sorry, you can
Oh no, I was just gonna ask, do you feel like the passion that you've had for film has been sort of like it's shaped more since you've started going just online with talking about and creating these spaces for people?
I didn't realize that I had interest in being like an educator in that sense. Like I was just
Okay.
kind of, typical passion for it. And I do absolutely still want to be a writer. I still want to be involved in pre-production work, especially, but realizing how amazing those conversations can be and how powerful it is when you get an opportunity to like lead someone into that. Like I got a text from a friend one day and they were like, "Hey, I was watching a show and I noticed this trope that you talked about on your page." And it made me feel like I was doing something smart, not just like sitting around watching TV. I'm like, yeah, that's the thing. That's what we're all looking for. It's like we wouldn't say that to somebody reading a book, like, oh, couch potato reading a
yeah.
book. We say that about
Yeah.
TV, and it's like we're consuming narrative, and that's a cool thing. And so realizing that there's a space for education to make people feel smart.
I want to like touch on something that you mentioned, and that was like you said that you don't want to have to only talk about things that are like classics and stuff like that. And I think that there's like a certain like pretentiousness in both with like film and reading books. Like
Yeah.
people are like, I don't want to talk about it unless it's like by one of the greats, or like it's not like real TV or like a real movie unless it's like one of like these and like made like from like 50 years ago versus like I don't both with you and I think Chin. He like talks about like anime and like random stuff all the time, but like actually like dives into it. And I like that. I like that it's not just like feeling like you have to talk about something because you're like told that it's important, but rather just like watching it and being like, this like meant something to me. And like, it like is important regardless of like how you categorize it.
Yeah, I everything you just said just was so perfect because it's so true.
Yeah.
I don't watch a lot of the classics because if I don't think I'm gonna have fun, I'm good. That's how most people watch movies. That's how most people watch TV. They're not watching it to check some box so they feel like they can call themselves a TV expert or a cinephile. And so I was like, why, in being a film major, am I going to force myself to watch things just so I can say, of course I've seen it? If it's not assigned for a class and I really am not interested in it, I probably won't watch it. Um, and that's just the human way of going about seeking out narratives, because the reality is, I think when we just talk about TV as like narratives, this is fiction narratives with visual rhetoric, and people are consuming that content. It becomes really weird to be like, well, you can only read Shakespeare and you can only focus on the great American classics. It's like, that is just as much reading as the Hunger Games, and TV is just as much TV when it's The Good Place. It's all good stuff. Yeah.
I don't know if I have a question off that, but just like going off of that, I feel like in line with your passion, the passion will stay ignited if you're following what you like, and not just like, oh, I literally have to do this, and that's just, I mean, that's like the easiest way to kill passion. And so I feel like I mean, I've seen it through your TikToks. I know Donna has seen it, and it's just cool to see somebody who has so much to say, and you can tell that they're genuinely like ignited by what they're watching and just consuming. I think it's cool.
I really appreciate that. I do. And like something I
Yeah.
always say is like, the greats didn't have their own movies to watch before they became the greats. Like,
Yeah.
to say something is essential viewing and be like, oh, you have to watch, I can't even think of, or I keep going back to The Sopranos.
2001.
Right.
Like
Like,
that, yeah.
I go back to The Sopranos because I've been doing some readings on it lately. So that's where my mind's going. Well, the creators of The Sopranos didn't have that. They had their creativity, they had their passion, they had their drive. And in this type of industry, they also had a hell of a lot of luck. That that's what you actually need to chase that creativity, to chase that passion. And I don't see a way that somebody can create the next great without any passion, especially in an industry that can so easily crush you.
Yeah. Another question that I have is like, what do you, I guess you touched on this a little bit, but like more specifically, like what do you see yourself doing in the future with your platform? And then like sort of like regardless of your platform on TikTok, what do you want to do? Because I know you said that you like write, but like do you want to be like a screenwriter or like a director, or are you just sort of figuring it out?
Yeah, where I see like career wise myself in the future is definitely writing for television, and fingers crossed show running and getting to create my own shows. And so that's my main focus. I could see myself also creating feature films, and hopefully directing some of them, but I definitely identify myself more as a writer than a director. And I have a huge interest in development of just a script lands on a desk. How do we decide if it gets made? How do we decide, you know, they said this is a horror movie, but they should actually tweak these elements and make it a thriller. And all of those decisions that take that story and let it become something that a person can see is really interesting to me. So as far as, writing is absolutely the dream, but on the path to that, I'd really like to be involved in development. So that's the career side of things. That's what me and the career counselor talk about. And then what I think about in with TikTok is definitely just um, creating more content outside of the app TikTok for longer form content, especially over the course of the summer. I'd like to be getting into some longer form content, and hopefully being able to continue that for a long time, which, will require changes as time goes on. Even just since I've had the account, it's been like from posting several times a day to most days to whatever the time calls for. But
Yeah.
just more ways to educate. I definitely want to be able to have like long series on particular topics that people can kind of tune into. So yeah.
By longer form content, do you mean like YouTube? Like kind of going off of TikTok and onto platforms where you can post a video that's, 20 minutes?
Yeah, I definitely like to get on YouTube more over the next couple of months, with kind of what I started talking about of like, here's a concept in TV theory, and I'm going to show it to you through the lens of this show. And maybe you've seen the show, maybe you haven't, but one way or another, by the end of this episode, you'll understand like TV flow or whatever concept I'm going to tackle in that video, but focusing on really accessible, common TV shows.
So how do you think that your just like identity and experience being like a woman, and specifically like a Black woman studying film, ties into like sort of what we talked about earlier, like the pretentiousness of like and like, are people in your class like sort of like undermining what you like think and say, or do you think that like that's not something that you've experienced?
Yes, definitely something I've experienced. I think that's an inescapable part of being in any space that's, I was going to say dominated by white male voices, but sometimes they're not even like dominant within the space, but they definitely dominate the airspace, as far as just how much they talk, but also as an industry, we're kind of airing back to talking about the classics, but those are determined by the people who had power as critics, who got their power from the other people who had power, which were again white men. And so even like the canon of film and television is so colored by that. And then when you bring your own experiences into that space from a marginalized perspective, it's like, oh, the establishment, the way that it's set up is already a little bit anti to the way that I think. So naturally, people who are buying into this are also kind of anti my thinking. That being said, just also being in spaces um, where there is an openness is so valuable. Being in spaces that do focus on marginalized voices in talking about movies like that, whether it's like a friend group or there's a film club at Fordham, and sometimes we just are talking about a topic, and you'll notice that some people in the room kind of acknowledge, oh, this isn't really for me to talk about. This is for me to listen. And the
Yeah.
people who do need to be talking get to have a great conversation, and the people who need to listen. And um, those spaces are also really valuable, even though there's inevitably the ones where it's silencing.
So, and how do you think that like when you watch film just like through like that lens, like what sort of things do you pick up on that you think that people wouldn't have to pick up on normally, like in film? Does that make sense?
No, absolutely, yeah. I mean, sometimes it's even just the simple stuff where it's like she's going to bed and she's not even going to put a bonnet on. Like, really, is that what we're going with right now in this story? Just moments, I think, of inauthenticity,
Yeah.
I feel like are the biggest things. There's recently a resurgence of an ongoing conversation on Twitter of like, man, Hollywood really like, they're like, yeah, Black queer people exist. We're only going to show them with a white partner though. And it's like
Yeah.
that doesn't match up with reality. Like to only show this entire community with like one experience at the center. But from an outside perspective, that might read as authentic just because that's all people know, you know?
Yeah.
But being able to look at that and say, that's not real. That's not how things actually are. She should put a bonnet on, and like just the simple things up to the larger things.
Yeah.
That can, I mean, watching something where the acting is bad, everyone's like, well, I can't believe this. And so I'm not as interested in it. Watching something that reads as inauthentic, again, it's like, I can't believe this. So I'm not interested in it.
I think that's something that I've been thinking about and particularly torn with when it comes to watching TVs and movies, is just that like there's been things that like I've wanted to like watch and I've wanted to like, and I've wanted to like look past the fact that it like doesn't represent people authentically, or the fact that like it might be just like something that like makes me uncomfortable because it feels like it doesn't like represent people like me authentically. So like I want to look past it and I want to like it because like all of the people around me are saying that they like it, but then it's like like I can't get past it too, so it feels like I'm missing out on that experience of being able to relate about like a particular like show or movie, but at the same time like I'm having a hard time like feeling okay with missing out on it, if that makes any sense. I think that a way to like tie it back down to like an example is last night I was talking to a friend about Game of Thrones, and she was talking about how it was like one of the greatest like shows and like we should watch it, and I was like, I wanted to watch it. I wanted to go on watching it because like I've been told that it's like one of like the best TV shows of our time. But then I started it and I was like, how is this the best TV show of our time? And I don't feel like seen, I don't feel represented. And so like while I want to have that experience and like agree with everyone who's saying all these amazing things about it, like it's not like something that I can like, I don't know, like relate to. And so like it sucks being on, like it feels like I'm on that side a lot of watching TV shows and movies.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And I'm smiling in part because you're bringing up two things that I just have been thinking about all day long. So, one is that FOMO for TV is very different now, because we have streaming. So, the whole like fear of missing out when we have cable TV is this came on Thursday at 8 p.m. and I missed it on Thursday at 8 p.m. How am I going to get back caught up with this show? What we have now, though, is that fandom is something that's so much more accessible because there's so many shows and we can all talk about it forever. Like part of Game of Thrones was just like the Twitter experience, but it also doesn't go away after the show's ended or like, when you miss a week or whatever the case is. Instead, it's like, no, you can stream all 8 seasons. It's like, you're asking for a lot. But you're also telling me that this is so amazing and like I have to see it. And so it's like we've kind of reinvented FOMO for TV in a way that
Yeah.
we haven't had to deal with before. And it's really interesting. And the other thing is, with something like Game of Thrones, I think you're just bringing up like a really great point is we talk a lot about like the greatest this and the greatest that. We need to get more used to asking like for who.
Yeah.
Like Game of Thrones, I have not watched it and I don't really want to because of kind of the reasons that you said where I'm like I don't see myself in this, and then I hear about the stuff that happens later, especially with this and that, and I don't want to watch it. I don't see how Game of Thrones is going to be the greatest show for me personally for what I am looking for, but particularly from the marginalized groups I'm a part of and just various intersectionalities. And so when we put those markers of greatest, we're often talking about something that centers and or is made by white men. And Game of Thrones being a peak example, but just consistently the pressure, this is I guess a recurring theme in this, but the pressure to look at the classics without remembering who the classics were made by and for.
Yeah.
Comes back again with the pressure to look at the greatest without talking about who they're made by and for.
Yeah. No, I think the for who part that you added was like a really like good thing. Like because that's exactly it. Like yes, like I'm sure that like a group of people like were able to like relate to it and like see themselves like be seen, but at the same time like I think that, and I was talking about this last night with you, Grant, I think that something that is like a little upsetting is like the plot and like the acting and stuff is seen more important than representation, but I think that like they need to be on like equal playing fields, because how good can something really be if if it excludes like an entire like group of people? But I think obviously in circumstances where they'd be relevant, like it wouldn't make sense to talk about like some groups and like some things that like aren't related to them. But I think in just like everyday like TV shows and movies, like how good can it truly be if it's still like based on excluding people from just having sort of like any experience with it?
Yeah, I feel like if there's an opportunity for bringing in that, it should happen. I mean, I think what you're saying right now, because wasn't the example that we were talking about like in Breaking Bad, how it'd be challenging to have certain representation shown in just like parts that wouldn't make sense throughout the series.
Yeah, so to give you a little bit of context, Breaking Bad was sort of like like what we contrasted Game of Thrones against when we had this conversation. And I don't know if you've seen it, but I was saying that like Breaking Bad doesn't feel exclusionary because like it feels like the choices that they made were like particular to like what needed to happen in the series. And like they did include people of color in that show, and like they did include them as like main like important characters, and they made them like in depth. But like for like the main guy Walter White, like it didn't seem like it was a missed opportunity to make him like someone of color or like a marginalized character, because it seemed like he needed to be exactly how he was to make the show like work. So I think that like I don't mind when I don't mind when like just choices are made that like make people not like a person of color, like not something, as long as it doesn't feel like that could have been an opportunity and they deliberately chose not to do it, if that makes sense.
Makes perfect sense, like perfectly said. totally. Because like some characters need to be white. Some main characters need to be white. The problem is thinking of white as default, and then
Yeah.
some, you know, not some characters are going to fit into stereotypes, but are they just like fitting into it because all human beings might fit into something, or are they just a walking stereotype? Like, you
Yeah.
know, just the things that actually acknowledge the like reality of the world. Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely feels like there is so much content out there that, like you said, the default is just like white dude or like white girl who just has this sort of relationship or this dynamic, and like these are the events. And I don't like, even as somebody who like is a white guy, like that's not like it's not what I would define as good. Like, why are we just defaulting to literally like what feels like a manual that was written in like, I don't know, like 1920 or something?
Yeah.
It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So then I have another question, and that would be, do you ever my mind just went blank. It was right on like the tip of my head. Oh, so there are like a lot of things that are like made, and let's use Glee as an example. And like an excuse for Glee that people use sometimes was like, oh, like the times, or like things made in like the early 2000s, or things that have like some sort of like offensive like language, or talk like derogatorily about like make jokes about like gay people or like things like that, and people are like, oh, it was the times, like you just have to look past that. What do you think about that excuse? And like, I don't know, I just wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah. Glee is a good example because I mean, dang, some of that shows. Wow, they put that on TV
Yeah.
on purpose. But you think about something like Glee, where yeah, they were trying, and yeah, the 2000s were what they are. But for about 2 seasons, every episode was written by one of three white men. So I can't say it was just the times, because I have trouble believing that Mercedes would have been written the same if there was any black person in the writer's room.
Yeah.
I have some trouble believing that Tina Cohen Chang would have been written the same. And so it's like, it's not just what time it was made, because there was other content that had a lot better representation. It's not just the fact that it's satire, because it was bad satire a lot of the times, and that's where the problematic elements came in. It's the fact that behind the scenes at every level, who you're centering are white guys. Is it really helpful that those guys happen to also be queer? Yes, absolutely. And that helped with representation in that space. But there's that lack of intersectionality that gets reflected in the work. And I feel like sometimes it's like, okay, the fact that it was allowed to air is reflective of the time.
Yeah.
The fact that somebody wrote it is reflective of them and what they felt was acceptable. So making that distinction. But then there's other things, and I think especially when it's smaller or just different, where I'm like, I'm ignoring it, and I am blaming it on the times. And right now, an example for me is The Nanny. It's one of my favorite shows ever.
Oh, I love
Just
that
have loved it
show.
for so long, yeah. And I've been rewatching it, and I'm like, oh man, there is some fat phobia here that I'm really not liking, and it's upsetting.
Yeah.
But the show's already made, and being aware of that, and then also not accepting it, not just being like, but it's okay, but being like, no, that was messed up then, it's messed up now,
Yeah.
and like, here's why it's a problem. But the show also is so very very done. Nothing I can do about it at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah. No,
I think
I
that's a
think
really good. Oh, sorry.
no,
I
go
was going
for
to say
it.
that I think that's just a really good recipe for just good storytelling later on. Like somebody who analyzes, like watches something, they can have some sort of level of like, I like this, but this is all, like, for lack of a better word, like really fucked up. Like, why are they doing this? For example, if that's you watching and you want to be a storyteller, that just feels like it creates such a good space for that to be a reality. But no, I just wanted to add that comment too, because I think that's really important, is to be able to watch something and sort of like watch it all the way through and analyze the really bad parts, and then kind of come up with solutions and like, well, this could have been better this way. Maybe we shouldn't have, done this, or maybe we should have done this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I think that my pretty recent equivalent of what would be like how you felt about The Nanny would be, I recently watched the Gilmore Girls. Like I binged just like all of the seasons in a couple of days. And I was like, dang, like I like this show. Like I like the plot line of it. And like there was just like I like the banter between like Lorelai and like Rory. I think it's cute. But then there are also just so many things where I'm like there were like so many times where like they were just like making jokes about like being gay, and like so many tropes of like Lane, her best friend, is like, and her mom is like stereotypical like Asian trope. And I'm like, I don't want to be giving them my money. Like I don't want to be like praising this show. And so I'm like, okay, like, and it's not enough as to where I'm like, this is a terrible show. And so there are points where I'm like, I'm gonna ignore it. I'm gonna ignore it so that I can just like watch it. But yeah, I think that that's something that I always feel like torn between. So
Yeah, totally. Same.
and I with that I always think like the times too, like it was made in like the early 2000s, I think, maybe like late 90s, I'm not sure. And so like I think that sometimes I lean a little bit into that excuse, but then I realize that like yes, it was made during that time, but also like it's not, that doesn't make it okay. Because something that I realized, I don't know if you ever watched um the first like couple of like seasons of the original like Degrassi shows. No? Okay. Well, that was made in like the late 90s, early 2000s. And it is probably like the single most like representative thing that I have seen. And so I'm like, if you guys were doing this like during like the times where everyone else was like saying like just like offensive things, and there's not really an excuse, because like even within a time period, like you can still not like just like make a group of people the butt of your jokes, you know, or like you can still like be representative and you can still like teach people things. So
Yeah, that's such a good point. Yeah.
so something that I wanted to talk about that I thought was really interesting in your videos is you made a video basically talking about directors and producers and people in Hollywood who have like been called like the great like directors, but meanwhile like doing very, very like abusive, like problematic things on set. And I was wondering if from like that perspective, like have you stopped watching like the things that they have like made, and like what are your like thoughts on them moving forward? I'm not sure if you know which video I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of them I wasn't watching their stuff in the first place.
Yeah.
Just from knowing about it, I'm like, oh, I don't want to see it. That's it. Like I don't,
Yeah.
because it's like, let me find the right words. Knowing that the way that something came to you was through someone else's pain always just destroys it, right? It's like if they're like, hey, here's this sandwich for you, just so you know, like the person who made this sandwich was being like berated by their boss the entire time. That's not as fun. It's just
Yeah.
not as good of a sandwich. And that's just like a simple, stupid example. But it's when there's active abuses on a set, it's like, I'm not going to watch this. And you know, I don't really care if they're the grades. I have not been in a class where I've been in one class where, well before I knew anything about Woody Allen, but one class that assigned a movie of his. I have never again been in a class where they were like, yeah, we're going to watch Woody Allen. Because we know what these people are doing. And some of them have more public record of their abuses like him, but other people get away with the nonsense that they do on and off set
Yeah.
and get clapped for as far as like, oh my God, great for you, a true auteur director. And I just will not be giving them my money or attention because the pain somebody goes through is not worth the art to me.
Yeah. No, and I respect that. And I definitely didn't know about just like the majority of directors that like you had talked about until like I had watched it, and I was like, oh my goodness. And I think that like I do have like a weird feeling about going back to watch some of the stuff now. Um and then my like a follow-up question about that would be just like overall, I guess, like through music, through like TV, through like books, like what's your thought on like separating like the art from the artist?
Yeah. Separating the art from the artist to me works in small ways. Um, when I'm in a class, I'm just using an example that I can like directly ground, but like if I'm in a class and it's a creative writing class and there's a kid in the class who I can't stand, but the piece that they write is amazing, I can separate the art from the artist. Because what I'm looking at is great. I just think that person's annoying. I think they're this. I don't like their public person, whatever. And you can apply that to other things. When it comes to bigger issues of bias, of prejudice, of abuse, I don't really feel like you can separate the art from the artist. And that's also just from like the perspective of creative. And I'm sure you guys have thoughts on this as well. You look at an example like J.K. Rowling, where it's like separate the art from the artist. But then when you analyze the art, there's hints of her transphobia in there. Yeah, there's hints of her anti-Semitism in there. How much can you really separate the art from the artist when the artist is pouring themselves into the art? You can't at the end of the day.
Yeah.
When it's just matters of personal opinion on a person, sure. But beyond that, it to me doesn't work because I know that there's so much of me in the art I create. And if I'm creating art that reveals a bias, that will mean that I need to work on that bias within myself. And if I have a bias, that's also going to impact my art, just knowing the way that I write and create. So that, yeah, I just wouldn't be able to say, yeah, no, I'm just watching it because of the art, not the artist. It doesn't really work for me.
But one of the things that you said is like when you create art and then you see pieces of yourself in it that maybe you have to work on, that just kind of like set me down. That's just like an interesting thought, I think, is because yeah, like when you're creating, what you're putting out there is coming from whether it's an experience or, you know, like thoughts or emotions that pertain to however you're channeling that into this, you know, movie, book, writing, painting, whatever. And then, but the way that you framed it as in like, oh, if there's a bias in me and I realize it from looking back on my art, I should fix that. And I don't think I've ever heard anybody else say that. And I just wonder what a lot of things would look like if people could be self-aware enough or like have enough empathy or just like level of emotional intelligence to sort of have that perspective and think like, oh, like I shouldn't, like this is, I should focus on this.
Yeah, no, I agree. I haven't heard anybody else say that. So like, I don't know, that's just refreshing to hear that. Like,
yeah, that was cool.
Yeah.
I think also just having like, I also know if I made something that was like really off, one of my friends would tell me.
Yeah, for
Maybe
sure.
like delete this and here's why.
Hey, don't be shy, delete this.
Tell you something.
Don't be shy, delete this.
That's I don't know how to tell you this. Please tell me you didn't send the email yet because this is garbage. Like if I was creating something off, knowing that somebody, even if it was already out there, even if other people weren't calling me out yet, to know that the people close to me in my life would be like, this ain't it. Absolutely. That's helpful. And I think there's also a level of like, I'm not a fan of the word policing, but a level of internal policing that happens.
Yeah.
Or like accountability.
Yeah.
Is that it?
Thank you. Yeah. A level of like personal accountability that happens when you know it's like, you know what, I'm getting into a topic that I might mess up. Let me pause and go look into people who actually know about that topic before I even broach the subject. And you know, it helps to know it'll happen. Like if I do say something, they'll be there, but also that it keeps me aware before I mess up.
Yeah. I think that's a really nice like exercise machine for just making sure that you're in check. Like it's nice to have people in your life that care enough to say like, hey, kind of messed up, like let's, you know, like circle back to this and then process through, and that creates a space for you to be like, oh yeah, like let's think about this. And then like you just said, the mindfulness piece comes in after, where next time like you can be more aware of how you're navigating, you know, whatever.
Yeah,
that's cool and important. I like that. I like all that a lot.
So I think something in this topic that I've realized that like scares me a little is just like figuring out, like when we were talking about like people and like directors specifically who have like biases and who have like done like bad things and like still are like acclaimed for it and like have fame for it. Something that scares me is figuring out that something that I really like was made by someone who is really horrible. Because like I know like there's so many people in Hollywood who have gone unchecked, just like in the music entertainment industry at all, like alone, they've gone unchecked for so many years. And so at any point in time, like you can always find out that like someone that you like admired, or someone whose art that you admired like isn't like the type of person that you want to be supporting. And I think that like that's both like a truth that like I have to like if it did happen, I'd have to be like, okay, like I know it now, and so like I know it now, you know. And so like yes, like it's ruined. Like something that I love is like just like the sandwich doesn't taste as good. But also like I'm just like very I don't know, I just like I'd hate that because there are so many movies that are like comfort movies to me and that are important to me. And I think just like the thought of having that experience ruined is scary. So sort of like the
Then
idea of
like
like ignorance is bliss, but like it's not really bliss because like it happened regardless of whether or not you refuse to acknowledge it.
Yeah, I 150% agree. And it's it's an interesting time that we're in because people's responses are often, instead of your response where it's like, I would like that the things I make are made by good people, their response is more like, why do we have to keep canceling them? And I'm like, that's not where we need to go. Where
Yeah.
we need to go is asking, like, why don't we stop it from getting to this place in the first place? Why don't we hold people accountable so that when I enjoy art or really get into a certain director or writer, I don't have it in the back of my head of, oh gosh, I hope you're not secretly terrible.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would just like to believe that it's like secretly terrible people, we don't keep the secret. We let the world know off the bat,
Yeah.
instead of this, you'll hear about this person and you're like, why is Hollywood not surprised? But all us normal people are, oh, you
Yeah.
guys knew, and you let them keep doing that. All right, that's why. Like I would love to not think anymore about if the person I enjoy is evil.
Yeah. I also like I have just like feelings about the idea that like we cancel everything because I think that a lot of it is just like accountability or like deciding that you don't want to support that person. And then like that decision is trivialized and people are like, oh, you like you're trying to cancel them. And it's like, no, I'm not trying to like can't like I think that that's been used to like I said, just trivialize the idea that like we want to actually like hold them accountable and like not give them our money and like not give them our attention.
I've never, yeah, I feel confident saying I've never made a video on TikTok where I criticize someone and I didn't get a, oh, we're trying to cancel them now comment. That is like one of the, it's, the only two things you can guarantee are death and taxes. The third, if you criticize someone, people will claim that you're canceling them. And I've never said the words cancel this person. It's just like you said, this trivializing like catch-all. It's supposed to be a gotcha. You're putting words in my mouth, like when people
Yeah.
do that.
So just like with your comments in general, how do you like I don't know, like what's like the overall like vibe of the comments that you get? Like how do people usually respond to like your ideas and thoughts and like things that you say? And sort of like on both ends of the spectrum, like the negative and the positive.
It I think varies a lot just depending on the video and where that ends up, especially with something algorithm based like TikTok. Um, it it sounds insane because I'm, talking about film and television and representation. I have gotten literal death threats, like more than once. And it's usually because
Yeah.
I'm like, hey, this director's problematic. And people will come out of the woodworks to,
Yeah.
have these angry responses. And then on the other hand, I've gotten comments that are like the most amazing things I've ever seen. Um, there's I don't want to, push the like, oh, you're on the internet, you got to have a thick skin. No, people need to be kinder and not crazy enough to send like harassing messages over a director.
Yeah.
Um, but I think it's just learning to protect your peace, knowing other creators, and just being like, oh, it's better if I filter these words out of my comments. And you know what? This video is going to a place that I don't really want it to. I'm just not going to check my notifications for a bit. And then also the self care to be like, oh, I'm really liking the response to this video. Let me like scroll through the comments and interact with these people and have conversations. And those moments aren't always people agreeing. Sometimes it's disagreeing, but you just find that the people who are responding are fostering like really healthy debate. And it's just a good time. And so in either vibe, it's just the self-care of being like, how much attention am I going to give this right now? And
Yeah.
sometimes it's just a lot of attention. And currently, actually today, just been a really great day of like healthy debate and just going on there and hearing different people's thoughts. And I disagree with like 80% of them, but I'm having a good time. and everyone is going there with that like level of respect. So I'm like, wow, it's a good day on the world of TikTok. Yeah.
Really quickly, I had a question from like a couple conversations ago about like Hollywood directors, the abuse that happens, and the comment that you made. You were like, we shouldn't let. You framed it actually as in like, why is Hollywood protecting them? Like, why are we like when we find out, we're all shocked, when they find out, they're not shocked. What I started to think about from that was like, what do you think, what kind of change, I mean, obviously the change would be don't let that happen, but how would we achieve, how could that change be achieved? Like, do you think it's just like a whole huge thing that would take so many different steps to reach, or do you think it's, you know, just completely scrapping it and starting from ground up, new, entirely different industry, whatever?
Yeah, I think part of it, I definitely think there's just so many aspects, and we're gonna hopefully find ourselves discovering all these different pillars that need to be knocked down. And I think some of them we won't realize until they're already down. And it's like, oh, that was propping up this whole, sector of nonsense. But I feel like a lot of it is just coming from people losing their patience with the the big guys, like the Golden Globes, for example, like the fact that that's not even going to be airing next year because people are done with it and are just saying like we're not putting up with this anymore. And the thing is, these like production companies that are calling out the Golden Globes, it's like some of you guys are just as bad as them. Like you have all the same problems that they do, but you saw public tide was turning against it, and part of it is just that we're able to have these public conversations easier. Like I can go on Twitter and reach a lot more people for no reason than anyone could in the past, especially to talk about film and television. Like we're not on small online forums. We can just speak into the world, and public perception sways a lot. So as we just start turning against the big guys and focusing more on the stories and what we're actually getting, and not on just letting the same people do whatever they want, I think we'll see change. But I think it's just going to be a lot of things happen, and we'll see where that keeps leading us.
Something that I think is interesting is that I've been seeing more just like very good representation, like more like things like Moonlight, If Beale Street Can Talk, anything that Ava DuVernay has made, basically. Like I've been seeing more like TV like that that's felt like it's like change is being made. And then along with that, I was having a conversation with one of my friends about this, and I was sort of mentioning that, and that it feels like there's like a new like sort of like wave of like people understanding that we need more just like inclusivity and stuff in film. And he sort of mentioned that that also happened during the 90s. Like there was a lot of, specifically like Spike Lee, like just like a lot of like really quality like gay and like black film like being like created. And so I guess I don't necessarily have a thought about this, but I'm wondering if like you think that there's like what the difference is between the two, because I've been trying to figure it out, like why I feel like this is different than like what happened in the 90s. But I don't know, I'm not really sure, so I was just wondering if I could bring that idea past you.
Yeah. Well, I think part of it is the I'll be able to answer the question a little bit more for TV just because that's where my brain leans.
Yeah.
Part of it with film is just like we're able to see a lot more right now. There are more theaters in the country, and we watch movies on our phones now, and like all of that makes things a lot more available, and so that's definitely a part of it. And then thinking about that in TV, it's like I mean the black sitcoms of the 90s, like there's just some iconic stuff right there. And then now I'm like a truly good black sitcom. It's very hard to come by.
Yeah.
Part of that is in that period we had like UPN. They were producing a lot of things. I think they produced like Everybody Hates Chris and just I won't even try and name them because my brain's already blanking. But just a lot of iconic, you know, um, black sitcoms. And then we see UPN fall, and then you have this just gap. But part of it is because Black viewers were seen as the only people who wanted to see Black shows. What we're seeing now is that with streaming, especially, TV is able to say something like, okay, we're going to let Michaela Cole make I May Destroy You. It's going to be this amazing. It's going to have this budget. It's going to blah, blah, blah. We're going to put it out there in the world. And yes, Black people will gravitate towards it, but it'll be available for everyone and anyone can find themselves watching it. And so those things are also getting the acclaim. And as they do that, they get more budget and they get more advertisement. And then we get to see more of them. And so I do feel like we're just in this moment where we're being flooded with a lot more talent. I'm focusing on, Black television because that's just, where I can talk about it more. And so, yeah, so streaming gives us this opportunity to have all of this. And another good example is like Living Single. When Living Single was pitched, it was kind of like, oh, it'll do all right. It's another 4-woman sitcom because there's just a ton of sitcoms with 4 women and they're like guy friends. So it was like, this is just another one of those and it's Black. And so we'll see how it does. And there's an article from 1994 that I read about it where they were like, well, it actually did #1 for Black shows in its time slot. And that was a specific thing that people were thinking about. I was like, how's it doing for the Black shows? So this is a time where we're looking and we're trying to get the Black viewers and just them. And it did really well for Black shows. It didn't even compare it to shows beyond that. It didn't even, talk about how's it doing in general. And then it gets ripped off, rebranded, lightened, get Friends. Yeah. And Friends is advertised to everybody. It's not sold as a white show or a Black show. It's just a television show because white gets to be the default. So what we're seeing now is there's no this time slot for the Black shows. It's, oh, you're all on Netflix. And yeah, this show is a primarily Black cast. This show elevates queer voices. This show, this, that, whatever the case is. But you're all on Netflix and you all might find yourself watching it. And oh my God, this did good. And now we at Netflix, Hulu, HBO, we're going to fund another project like that. And oh, it did good again. And so there's a lot more freedom with that.
Yeah. And then my question based on that, like, I think that we are seeing a lot of like really good things that like include like representation of minorities. And I mentioned this question in the doc, but I was wondering if you had any thoughts on the idea of Black mediocrity. And it's, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the concept, and Grant, I'm not sure if you are either, but it's like the idea of like, in order to be seen on TV or in order to get like budgets for films, like movies that have minorities in general have to be like 4 times like better in order to get like the same like attention and the same funding. And people are arguing that like that shouldn't have to be the case. Like we should be able to just make like a mediocre movie the same way that like Adam Sandler makes movies, or the same way that like even Tyler Perry like now makes movies, and still like get like recognition for them. So I was just wondering like what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah. My thing when people say that they want Black mediocrity is, what are you actually asking for? Because what I think people are really trying to say is, I want to see Black content that doesn't have to be at the top of its game.
Yeah.
But I don't want to see anything mediocre. I don't want to see Black mediocrity. I don't want to see white mediocrity.
Yeah.
What gets called white mediocrity is usually complete trash. Like, it's not mediocre, it's terrible. But, using Adam Sandler as an example, Adam Sandler movies are not my cup of tea. He's accessing a sort of humor that works really well. Like it makes money and it gets people in seats. And so is it mediocre? Not necessarily. It's entertainment that successfully entertains. It's comedy that hits a pretty specific target audience as like comedic works. So is it an Oscar-winning movie? Is it something that you tell everyone that they have to watch? Probably not. It's not mediocre by my standards, by any standard of like, what is the goal of this? Does it achieve that? Does it do so in an intelligible way? Yeah. I want that for Black people. I want us to be able to set the target where we want and not have to set the target at being critically acclaimed by white audiences, but of being like, okay, here's the goal. This is going to be a movie where 2 people fall in love. They're going to also have comedy. They are not going to have trauma. They are not trying to dance their way out of the hood. Nobody's in a gang. This is a rom-com. People feel romance. They laugh at the comedy. They feel good. That's it. That's the goal. You reach it. Perfect.
Yeah.
Like that's what I want for Black people. I guess I just don't feel comfortable calling
It like,
setting a different
yeah.
finish line mediocrity.
No, yeah, and I think that that's a really good like thought on that. And like I agree now that I'm hearing you like say that. Because like yeah, no, like I don't want like bad movies. I don't want mediocre movies. But it would be nice to have a movie and like not have to like beg for there to not be like some sort of trauma like sort of like built
Yeah.
in it. I also think that India Moore was talking about that too, just like with pretty recently she was talking about trans people being able to do roles that aren't specifically about being trans and don't like intrinsically include like trauma and like all of the emotional like baggage that comes with it, because she was like that's played like that's like boring. Like we want to be able to actually like act in a role that's about being a person, like a role that's about just like a storyline, like a rom-com, like anything that's not like having to do with like the trauma that comes from our identities. And I think that that's also like what I would like to see in movies, just about like any minority really, like where they actually get to just like be instead of like having the story be based in like just like these like terrible things.
Absolutely, yeah. And also recommendation, Together is a new movie that stars Patty Harrison. Glad the name came back to my mind, but it's just fun like as a movie, just like a good watch. And it's something people might call mediocrity just because it's like, wow, this just feels good to watch. There's no crazy goal. But also Patty Harrison is a trans actress, and it's is not even a topic. It's just like she was just the right actress.
Yeah.
That's all. I'm like, thank you. That's all we needed.
Yeah.
She's great for the role. Her comedic timing works. It's good chemistry with the actor. That's all we needed. Thank you. Let's make a movie. It's refreshing to just be able to watch and know like, okay, she's not in this movie to harp about, you know, her pains and terrible experiences being trans. She's in this movie to act. Great, love it. Let's see it.
Yeah. Oh, so this is just like a pretty general question, because like it seems like you're always able to just like pull examples from like the top of your head, or like you like know like names and like plot lines and stuff like the back of your hand. And so I'm wondering how much like TV do you watch, and like is it like something that you actively choose to do? Are you like, I want to watch this because I'm in the mood to learn right now? Or do you just like put on something that you think you would like to watch and then you learn in the process?
I'm definitely more of like I put on something I'd like to watch and I learn in the process. Some things Queen Sugar is an example where like I really like the stories and I'm into it, but I also am partially watching because the cinematography is just beautiful. Like some of the best cinematography on TV to me. Um, and so there's just like that double edge of like I know I'm about to watch something like really stunning. So even though I want to watch it when I'm, multitasking, I also that's a show I'm gonna watch when I can have my eyes glued to it,
Yeah.
and that kind of thing. But yeah, I'm more just guided by what do I want to watch right now, and that's also kind of where my content sometimes ends up going, where I'm like, oh, we're going down a rabbit hole where I'm only talking about comedies for a little while because I just want to laugh.
Yeah.
As far as how much I watch, I have like tried to track it recently, and it ebbs and flows, of course, with like school and work and what I have time for, but at least 50 hours of TV every month.
Yeah. So I have a
More than I
question.
thought it would be, but yeah.
How do you like, because there's just like such an idea, and you mentioned this earlier, that like sitting down and watching TV, like you're lazy, like you're not doing anything. Like, how do you get past that in your mind? Because like that's something that like I am trying to like get past. Like when I want to sit down and watch a movie, like I'm trying to like tell myself that like I'm like I want to do this, like this is making me like happy. Like yes, I could be doing a billion other things, but I don't want to be doing those things right now. So like I don't know, how do you deal with like that sort of like the narrative of like what it means to just like sit down and watch TV all day?
Yeah. I feel like for me, part of it is that I'm just consistently aware, just like a part of my life. Just like this is art.
Yeah.
I'm watching art, You go to like if we talked about going to the Met as, yeah, she just sat around and looked at pictures all day, It's like, what are you talking about? It's the
Yeah.
Met. It's these beautiful paintings. If we talk about reading as like, oh, all day with the words on the page, like, what? They're reading the Odyssey. Like, we could reduce things easily, but when I'm talking about TV, it's like you're sitting there and you're taking in like visuals, audio, narrative, character building, world building. With a
Yeah.
TV show, you're taking in hours of that, all different elements of art. You're taking in these acting performances. That's like very cool art that you can do in your living room with your laptop, with your TV, with your phone. So the fact that just television as art is like such a part of my life makes
Yeah.
that easier. And I'm also just a huge multitasker. So, you know, it's like I said, like usually at least 50 hours a month. And that's not like on purpose, it's just what happens. But when I have months where it's like 70, 80 hours, I'm probably also incredibly busy, but furiously multitasking.
Yeah.
So
So where do you think that that idea came from then? Like, where do you think that the separation between like reading a book all day and going to like an art museum all day, between like watching TV all day, like I don't know, I'm just like curious as to like why that became a thing.
yeah, when you think about, some of it is about just trying to gain value by making something else less valuable. And this is a huge problem from my perspective within film and television, is like television is looked down upon versus movies in part because they feminize the TV of, oh, the housewife all day at home, and the TV's for the wife and kids because they're the ones in the house. We're still stuck in the construction of TV that came from the 1950s about who was at home, even though we're marketing TV to men like 18 to 40.
Yeah.
Um, and then at the same time, within television, it's like watching Breaking Bad. That's good. That's prestige. You're doing everything you need to. Watching a soap opera. No, bad TV, which is also feminized once again. Um, Twin Peaks hits a lot of soap opera elements. It won't be called that because that would be feminized. Twin Peaks, that's good. We love. So even within, film and television, and just within television alone, you see that like feminizing of things. Film, you'll see the same thing with rom-coms. So you want to make something seem really good, you just say other things are bad. You want to make culture be defined by going to the theater and the classic notions of what culture is, you make film and TV more bad. And I think the more accessible it becomes as well, you can't hold pretension because you got to watch Glee. You can't.
Yeah.
You can hold pretension because you got to go see Hamilton with the original Broadway cast, but how much is that worth now that it's on Disney Plus? Like, the more accessible things become to people, the less quote unquote value it has. And film and television have
Yeah.
always been incredibly accessible.
Yeah, I noticed that like specifically, it's interesting that you mentioned Hamilton, because like with musicals in general, like there had been more musicals, like musical adaptations to TV, and like the theater, like people who were like in theater and like majored in theater and stuff were getting just like really like gatekeepy over like what was theater. They're like, well, that's not theater because like it's on TV, and it did seem like the more accessible like things like that became, like the more that they're like that's bad, but like the real theater is like the good kind of theater. So yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
What are your top three, like top three favorite things that you have ever watched ever, which I know is a difficult question.
Oh, super hard question. I'm really bad at picking favorites. And what I always preface by saying is anytime you ask me, my answers might be different. So anyone who hears me on some other podcast and is like, wait a minute, that's not what she said last time, I promise it's just because I have no idea. So I tend to answer for favorite movies what's on my Letterboxd favorites right now, which is The Photograph, Lemonade Mouth, and Widows. And you know what? I'm pretty comfortable with sticking with those. At
Okay, but
least
Living
for
Lady Mouth is a good movie. Like that's a really
oh,
good movie.
absolutely. I mean, iconic for sure. For television, some of my favorites are The Twilight Zone. Huge fan of The Twilight Zone. Queen Sugar, which I mentioned earlier, just beautiful cinematography. The Good Place, I would say, is even one of my favorites. The Nanny. Now it's becoming a list, so I'm going to cut myself off right there. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any guilty pleasures, like anything that you watch and you're like, oh, I don't want to tell anyone that I watch it, which we're gonna make you tell everyone.
Don't have many guilty pleasures. I would say the only one, and I don't watch it anymore because the guilt outweighed the pleasure at some point. But it was America's Next Top Model.
Oh my God.
Tyra
I
Banks
I went
being
through
absolutely evil, but
none of that. You cannot convince me that any of that, like, she intentionally like meant for them to become like world famous supermodels. Because I've seen some episodes where I'm like, you just did this for fun. Like,
just for
you
fun.
yeah.
It was pure evil. But at the time, it just seemed like it made a little sense. It didn't. It still doesn't.
No.
And yeah, it was one where the guilt eventually outweighed the pleasure, and so even that's not necessarily a guilty pleasure anymore. But that's my go-to answer.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there anything else that you want to like talk about, like mention?
Off the top of my head, this has been a great discussion. Like I'm having a great time, and the fact that it naturally went in a couple avenues that have been a particular passion for me lately is just such a bonus. So
Yeah.
it's been great. I can't even think of another thing.
No, I've loved this. Do you
Yeah.
what's your, you should add us on Letterboxd. We should have both
You
of
should
us.
add us on Letterboxd.
Yeah.
That's my favorite
Most
app.
of my stuff are like meme reviews. I'm warning you already. But every once in a while, I put like a real review out there.
Oh my goodness.
I don't remember half the time after I watch a movie, but sometimes it'll come to mind, and my review will be like, "Sick." Just
Yeah. Dope.
that was all right. Or like just a quote from the movie, and I'm like, that was
Yeah.
weird.
No, literally the meme reviews are always the best when it's just somebody like just saying something that's just so like a meme-esque.
Yeah.
But it's like 5 stars, so I'm like, I like that review. I don't like that one.
We'll make good letterbox friends.
Exactly.
Perfect.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you guys so
This is
much for
awesome.
inviting me. Yeah, this is
Yeah.
really cool. And
Yeah.
hopefully just keep in touch.
Yeah. If we're ever all in New York, we should hang out.
Absolutely.